We have now a panel where we're going to be talking about Tech for Good. So this is going to be looking at a little bit of a showcase for Startup Impact Summit and how we transform through tech. We have a really good panel, and because I know the panel will introduce themselves, I will allow them to do that. Why don't we, I understand that all of our speakers are here, so why don't we hand over. We have the person who's going to be leading today's event is Rodney van Dooren. He is the Director of Illicit Trade Prevention for Asia Pacific at PMI. He's joined by Mark Blick, CEO of Diginex Solutions, Boris Brault, CEO of Bao Group, and Tat Lam, CEO of Shanzhai City. So folks, apologies if I have massacred the pronunciation of any of your names, but why don't we turn over to Rodney? And thank you very much, panelists, for joining us. We're thrilled to have your expertise, and let's talk about Tech for Good. Over to you.
Very good, and thanks for the very kind introduction. Can everybody hear me okay? Maybe just give me a sign. Perfect. So looking forward to 45 minutes. You know, I've got to begin by offering a, let's say, huge thank you to Invest Hong Kong and WHub for organizing, let's say, during challenging times, a historic event. It truly is a historic and remarkable event, and I think a very timely event as well, this being the CIS 2020 Startup Impact Summit. And I say timely as, with all that's going on in the world, impact is precisely what is needed, and it's needed right now. And the title of this panel is extremely pertinent, that being to showcase how technology is being used, like what was said before, for good. And I really must emphasize the part on for good. So I thank all those who are listening in. You'll be hearing from 3 heads of startups. Startups like many of you out there who are demonstrating their desire to leverage technology to drive, let's say, transformational initiatives for good. So as was mentioned, my name is Rodney van Dooren. I work at Philip Morris International, also known as PMI. I'm heading PMI's illicit trade prevention function in Asia, based out of our regional headquarters in Hong Kong. Now, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, due to COVID-19, I'm currently locked down in Melbourne, Australia. I guess this is a case in point, as Technology for Good has enabled, let's say, this panel with myself in Melbourne, Dr. Lam and Mark joining from Hong Kong, and also Boris connecting in from the USA, where I think it's, what, 3 o'clock in the morning right now. So I hope you're still with us, Boris, in the next 45 minutes. My employer, PMI, is a global company with a vision to deliver a smoke-free future. I know that sounds very unusual for many of you, considering we're known as a tobacco and a cigarette company, but our vision clearly is delivering a smoke-free future. And as you can appreciate, this is a substantial shift. PMI is going through a dramatic transformation. Dramatic is not a statement. Our vision, our purpose, as I said, is to deliver a smoke-free future, which requires PMI to innovate and develop products based on science and technology and transform for good. And that starts with transforming internally, but also then transforming the industry at large. Now, PMI is far from being a startup. However, we do adopt startup principles such as consumer centricity, adaptive strategy, and iterative experimentation, just to name a few. Before I introduce our panel, I'd like to share with you two key P initiatives. I'm just going to share my screen. There's a couple of slides that can show it a lot better than what I can explain it. This first initiative is known as, should be coming up now, PMI Impact. You can see that on the screen, right? So PMI Impact is an initiative that PMI launched, I think, about 3 years ago now. There's already been 2 very substantial funding rounds where projects are submitted by people like you, and where the assessment of those projects is done by an expert outside counsel. by an expert outside counsel. I'd ask you to spend a little bit of time going to the PMI Impact website, try and get familiar with what it's all about. The intention here is to try and find ways through projects to prevent and eradicate illicit trade. Now, we're not talking about the illicit trade in tobacco per se, we're talking about illicit trade in general. There's going to be a third funding round which is introduced probably later this year. And there's no silver bullet to eradicating illicit trade, but we strongly believe that technology has to play a much more substantial role in the solution of eradicating illicit trade. So for those of you who are interested, go to the website, get more familiar with what it's all about. And then when the third funding round's out, hopefully then you're better prepared to position yourself possibly for a submission, which once again can be considered by the outside counsel. The second initiative I wanted to briefly mention is this one. It's called PM Equity Partners. So PMI's corporate venture capital arm invests in early and growth stage companies. Simply, we're interested in great ideas that support our vision of a smoke-free future. The companies we back are typically able to tap into PMI's extensive R&D, operational and marketing capabilities, and would have a deep involvement in our supply chain. We provide selected entrepreneurs with long-term support, not only on financing, but there's also the possibility of mutual benefit at a strategic and both commercial level. Since yesterday, as part of the SIS20 Summit, we're participating in the mini hack, where I believe the final pitch of a short list of these candidates will take place immediately after this panel today. So I'm just going to stop sharing that for you now. Again, you can see the websites there, so please do get familiar. If any of you are out there, particularly the startups, are in any way interested, it's certainly worth a look. So today we're here to talk about Tech4Good, to showcase the impact of startups and share how we can use technology and how we are using technology to transform the world. Allow me to introduce our startup CEOs, our speakers for today. I'll introduce them one by one, and I'll ask them just to say a few words about themselves. So firstly, Dr. Tat Lam. Dr. Lam is the CEO of SZC Holdings. Dr. Lam, can you hear me? And if so, please go ahead and introduce yourself and a little bit about your professional background.
Yeah, I just got myself unmuted. So hello, everybody. Founder and CEO of Shanzhai City is a Hong Kong company. 6 years ago, we actually developed technology solutions for development finance, impact investments, impact measurements, and also community currencies in Asia and some other global South countries. Probably, I think I will share more later on about our experience working in all the villages in the world, like promoting technologies, like how they can implement it and work with the grassroots community. Thank you.
Rodney, you're on mute, I think.
Yeah, you're mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Look, the work of Dr. Lam is truly transformational. And as Dr. Lam mentioned, he'll be taking or talking us through more the transformation that he's trying to drive. Look, but from my experience in PMI, that's 24 years now, but more recently in the last 3 years, transformation's really not easy. It's intensive. It requires a massive change, particularly in a company like ours culturally, and it requires an absolute commitment. PMI has 400 plus scientists and engineers. We've invested near $7 billion in R&D to drive the vision. And fortunately, there's been advancements in science and technology, thanks to people like yourselves, who have enabled the development of new products that bring about the desired change and impact. But it's a journey. And Dr. Lam will talk later about Shanzhai City more broadly, and where he's making a fundamental difference in the bottom billion lives using technology. Now I'd like to introduce to you Mark Blick. Mark is the CEO at Diginex Solutions. Diginex is an ESG data infrastructure company. If you can hear me, Mark, please go ahead and introduce yourself and a little bit about Diginex.
Thank you, Rodney. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining. As Rodney mentioned, Diginex Solutions, we're a data infrastructure company focused on the development of software to improve ESG data decisions. We're both a product and a services company. Transparency and immediacy is really at the heart of what we're looking to do, and we leverage our platform to drive a meaningful change. A lot of the feedback that we've received across both public and private sectors, and we work with both sectors quite equally, has been a sense of frustration about the stale data that's currently being supplied once a year that has often made it difficult to do yearly comparisons. And on the flip side, we're finding a lot of companies that are willing to supply information if it helps them demonstrate better governance, but lack a reliable and contextually suitable platform to do so. And that's why we've, over the last 3 years, been building out data infrastructure that collects, surfaces, and shares data amongst the complex ecosystem of stakeholders in a more transparent and immediate way. We grew very much out of social governance and our relationship with an organization called the Mekong Club, focused on forced labor and modern slavery and combating it within private sector supply chains around the world. And I think we'll go into that in a little bit more detail later on.
Sure, thanks, Mark. It's definitely interesting what you guys are doing, and thanks for being so on point. Yeah, as Mark just mentioned, as I mentioned before, PMI Impact, in its desire to empower organisations to use granted resources to develop tools to address serious illicit trade issues and related crimes, relates to some of the work that Mark's been doing. So he mentioned Mekong Club, which has received a grant in the second funding round from PMI Impact, and I only realised very recently that it's actually Mark and Diginex that built the technology, which is the app to support that project with the Mekong Club. So thanks to Mark specifically for the work that you've been doing with Mekong Club with regards to that PMI Impact project. Now I'd like to introduce to you Boris Brault. Boris is chairman and founder of BOW Group. You're there, right, Boris? You can still hear us. It's what, 3:09 in the morning now, so thanks for sticking with us. Boris, could you briefly explain a little bit about yourself and your professional background?
Yes, hi everybody. Good afternoon, Hong Kong. It's the middle of the night here in the East Coast of the United States, but I'm very pleased to introduce myself. So I'm in the consumer electronic business since 2001. I have worked during 10 years for a Taiwanese company, and actually I took the challenge back in 2012 to start in the connected consumer electronic business, and with my first company, Micronose, based in Geneva. I took the challenge actually to bring this Swiss company trying to become a wearable leader in this industry. And back in 2017, we ran the biggest Kickstarter campaign ever for a European company. We raised totally $8 million found. And at the end of 2017, we have been pleased to get PMEP on board and acquire our ODM factory in Shenzhen with all the team of mechanical and electronic engineer who help us to secure our vision in this challenging world. And I'm sure I will let you know in the next questions about our vision in this IoT world where we try to become one of the leaders.
Absolutely, Boris, and thanks for the introduction, and thanks for being one of PM's equity partners. I'd like to move ahead by now calling out the panelists, just some very specific questions. I think importantly for the audience, guys, if any of you have any questions at any stage, please ask them through the chat room. And then I'm sure we're going to have time at the end, and we'll use that time to refer to your questions, and then I'll pose them out to the people on the panel. So please make sure when you're asking the question, be specific about who you want the question directed at. But please do at any stage go ahead and pose your questions. So what is vital, I think, for all startups is, and I'm no expert, but I've been listening to these guys over recent times and reading up a little bit based on PMI's transformation. But a clear purpose is really, really important. And that purpose really should be a purpose for good. What is also vital, I think, is an opportunity to influence for good. So having the engagement capacity and capability to, again, influence for good. And I think what's also particularly important is to understand that it's always within a forever changing environment. So I'm going to emphasize here purpose influence, and changing environment. I'm going to try and ask the questions to the three guys based on those three things: purpose, influence, and changing environment. So starting with Dr. Lam, if you don't mind. Your purpose, or the purpose of your company, lies in addressing community issues with tech essentially as the enabler of that. So my first question to you, Dr. Lam, is how do you communicate impact technology to grassroots communities, Dr. Lam?
Well, I mean, I think the fundamental, theories that we have right now is that, the next generations of poverty is actually not created by, the imbalance of money deployment, but actually the information barriers. So really about like, for example, somebody from a village not know how to use a cell phone, or they cannot afford to pay the cell phone plan, they're actually potentially suffer from, a lot of very unfair things. So I think the idea about like how we communicate impact actually coming back like about like how we actually able to build the data literacy with the communities. So I mean, they need to understand there's a huge amount of data around them, and then they can read those data, they can understand what's going on with their communities. When there's a huge amount of money the government or some development bank is actually putting down building a railway, what is actually the impact on them? So at the end of the day, it's really about like communicating impact, not just upwards, but actually communicating impact downwards. Like how we able to make impact communication more decentralized and more public. I think at the end of the day, I think transparency is the fundamental incentive for everybody to participate in a development project, whatever social development, infrastructure developments, and so on. So what we believe that like the way that we actually going to encourage transparency or communication is what we call a two-way impact measurement or impact communication system. It's not about like a bunch of researchers or PhDs just go to the site and collect data, coming up with a 200, 300, 500 pages of a report, and the report is sent to some governments, and the government just shelve it, and nobody knows what's going on. But I think with data technology, everybody actually able to know what's going on with, in real time, what's going on with the community, so that the transparency eventually asks them to look for more more communications, and more communication means more engagement, and more engagements means participation. And at the end of the day, I think development finance can be inclusive. So, I mean, I don't think there are a lot of tricks about that. Like we spend like 75% of our time working in a village. I'm personally an anthropologist. I literally like spending months and months and months just with the villagers, just teaching them how to use a cell phone. I mean, just really about hard work.
No, thanks for sharing, Dr. Lam. Do you see any evidence of a breakdown in globalization as a result of COVID? And has that had any real immediate impact on the work that you do specifically with communities?
Well, I think the entire COVID actually proves the malfunctions of the system of globalism. Like the entire value chain of the world broke down, the bank's transaction system broke down because nobody could fly around and do the real-time signature. And the supply chain, like, we don't know what's going on with a specific region, like how many masks that they need and so on. Like we cannot validate the need, the donation money get in, they don't know where it is. The public just really suspicious about any kind of philanthropic or even impact investment money because they cannot send people to go to the site and do any kind of validation. I think that's actually a proven case of we cannot rely on globalism or any globalization. Like globalization is not the only way the world should go. But on the other hand, like there's actually a program that we try to work in Hong Kong. Is what we call a community currency. It's actually a local community voucher based on the value of time that local community started circulating around that. And it's just really interesting that all these low income families, they lost their job. So they're literally relying on the local community transactions. And the well-beingness, like the wellness of local communities is not about how much money that they can spend to supermarkets or some international brands, but how much, mutual helps that they can help each other. Like I can help my neighbors to take care of the kids. So I can earn 2 hours of time, a voucher. I can spend that to pay for my neighbors to take care of my mom tomorrow, to bring her to the clinic. I think that is actually another type of well-beingness that we actually are looking for, but it's really or totally independent of money or time, but it's really about a community trust.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing, Dr. Lam. And no doubt that's from experience on the ground. It has nothing to do with 1,000 books that are behind you on the shelf, right? So.
Oh yeah, that's actually all my kids' books.
Look, thanks, Dr. Lam. I'm going to turn the attention now to Mark, if you don't mind, Mark. Where I understand in the work that you do, I think being able to influence, this word influence, so influence stakeholders is vital, right? So my question for you would be, what is your approach to stakeholder influence within the context of social governance and specifically in the context of combating forced labor?
So I think when we started this project 2 or 3 years ago, again, working with the Mekong Club, we very much started from grassroots up. We were always searching for where does the impetus to change come from? Does it come from, if you go from left to right, does it come from civil society and NGOs? Does it come from United Nations and governments? Does it come from companies who want to do the right thing or have been forced to do the right thing? More recently, we've been looking at, does it come from asset managers and capital allocators? And now we're starting to look at, does it come from sovereign wealth funds and large pension funds? And you see folks like the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund divesting entirely from G4S because of cases of potential human abuse in the Middle East. So we look at all of these different stakeholder groups and trying to work out where does the primary driver come from? And the answer is, of course, it comes from all of them, but in slightly different ways. I think what we've learned over the last 2 years is that you need to have done your groundwork on the left-hand side of that scale in order to be of interest to the people on the right. And I think many of the companies that we see in the space sort of jump right in the middle and try to deal at the corporate company level first. But I think what it really means is getting to understand from our context and our work on social governance and forced labor, and we're now in 8 different countries across Southeast Asia and Asia, is how to get migrant workers and factory managers engaged with the platform. And there we've spent several years in shrimp farms, plantations, toy factories, bottling plants, and recruitment agencies learning how to do this. And really the technology, putting it to one side for a second, or at least making it a secondary concern. And the primary questions are, how does this make my life easier? Or how does this make my life safer? And trying to solve for those 2 questions. And I think for factory managers, it's all about operational efficiency and how to make their lives easier. They don't want another task that means they have to go home later. Often this is about digitizing existing workflows and allowing them to share information upwards in a more time efficient way. And for migrant workers across all the engagement and surveys that we've run, it's about having the security of having all of their employment data and information in one place that they can easily share with managers or other interested stakeholders, not needing to carry photocopies of passports or contracts around with them. And I think once you get these groups engaged, then you can start collecting, surfacing, and sharing meaningful data up from the front line, and then sharing it with those stakeholder groups on the right-hand side. So if you are a large pension fund sitting in California, or you're an asset manager sitting in Europe, you want to reach down into the supply chain of a company and extract information once you have factory managers and workers engaged and you're able to do so, particularly if it's aligned to standard ESG reporting indicators. We're now collecting in under 6 minutes, 35 different data points around migrant workers and their employment, either from the documents that they have or the interacting with the platforms that we're putting out in the field. And I think you'll come to this question a little bit later around hurdles to achieving that. But I think that stakeholder influence is important, and we really do identify it in terms of from left to right. NGOs, civil society, governments, and United Nations or intergovernmental organizations, companies, then the investor world, which is just becoming more and more important in the type of influence that they're able to push down the chain.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing, Mark. I guess this work is especially sensitive, and I feel like I speak for everyone who's connected today by saying that what you're doing in this space is much appreciated. Interestingly, has there been massive impact for you on your ability to influence as a result of what's happened recently with COVID, keeping in mind who the audience is, being immigrant workers?
I would say it's yes and no. I'd say a bit like Tat's point, our ability to implement, get on a plane and implement in the field has slowed down. Yeah. However, I would say that has been more than counterbalanced by firms becoming increasingly aware of social governance or worker welfare and how important that is. And just topically in the past week, I don't know whether you've been following Boohoo Group in the UK, and it turned out that there was cases of forced labor in factories in Northern England. This came up because of the cluster of COVID-19 cases. And then you look at them losing $1.5 billion in share value over the past 2 days, and you can see the investor pressure then coming through on a company to change the way in which they report information on the governance standards for workers and welfare. So if anything, that has accelerated the lens and accelerated the need to get more data. So I think overall, much as obviously it's been terribly impactful this year and on a good way, that increased focus on people, worker welfare, and social governance has been accelerating.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing. I'm going to move the attention now to Boris. Hey, Boris. I'll ask you to touch on changing environments, which was the third piece of this introductory statement. Could you please briefly introduce WHub Group's its activities, maybe describe its mission and how the mission is so relevant in this always-on changing environment?
Yes, Rodney. So WHub Group is a young platform where we are powered by our own manufacturing and R&D center in Shenzhen, as well as two strong brands, one IoT specialized in all the wearables in Geneva, and one design studio, a famous brand in Paris. Actually, our mission is really to make well-being and well-living available to everyone through a very wide range of affordable products. Very designed, connected, and using our own mobile app. As a young group, we have the ability to be agile and to seize opportunities. And I think we are really trying to develop products that really match the consumer need and the new expectation. And recently with the COVID, it's true that with Micronose, we have with our team immediately include new sensors for body skin temperature, blood oxygen, immediately to our new range that will launch at the end of 2020. Our smartwatches under $99 will have this ability to give you immediately some new data, which are really important and relevant to end users without asking them to acquire expensive devices at a couple $100. But as well with Lexon, where we are really in the home, really known as a design house in the home collection, we have developed accessories which take the advantage of the UVC technology. And where we have seen, especially in the US, a strong demand these last weeks on this kind of device, which help to kill the virus on top of your mobile phone. And we are very pleased to have developed that 18 months ago, and now getting more interest from the consumer. So this is what I can share with you right now.
No, thanks for sharing, Boris. I think for most people on the call, it's a pretty interesting space, right? It's lifestyle stuff, and I'm pretty keen myself to see the production or the output of these watches that you were talking about, because I know there's a big part of the world at the moment that can't access similar watches for pure affordability reasons. So definitely looking forward to that. So we've explored purpose, influence, and changing environments. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit now, and we're going to talk a little bit more about being in tune with local communities. So let's explore local communities in a little bit more details. Dr. Lam, so how do you go about respecting the culture in local communities when implementing technology, not from within the community, but actually from the outside?
Yes, it's a really interesting question, because we start projects like at the very beginning, like a few years ago, just about getting data from them so that we can, try to monitor impacts of projects and so on. And I think there is definitely a lot of resistance for people to disclose more and more information to you regarding to their privacies and so on. I think, it's actually, quite, how to say, or even more and more a bigger problem when we actually start to engage with more sensitive population, for example, like refugees. Their data is actually being quite sensitive, because they need to always trust you. But on the other hand, I think the international organization need to get those kind of data so that they can really do the help. So I think, that is actually the starting point, that we really need to understand why they care about their data, not from the outsider perspective, say, hey, this data coming to me and then I will give it to them. But we actually need to understand from their internal system, how they think about their data. I think the entire concept about data sovereignty is so important that we need to really respect that this data actually belongs to them, and they always have their control. They always need to know what is the use of that. They always need to understand what is the, how to say, like, what is the consequence of them actually giving you that kind of data. But like once we start to touch the topics of finance, for example, okay, we actually are creating a few community development bonds on blockchains in Southeast Asia, and it's actually even start to how to change their, their village or their cooperative governance, like about how they're actually going to handle the money, who can make decision of this kind of money and so on, because all those kind of things actually need to written down into smart contract of the blockchain. So we originally think that, we know so much, we know all these kind of transactions in the world, we know how world bank work, and how about we just simplify this world bank idea and give it to you? But eventually that doesn't work, because what we actually need to understand is like how the village handling money for the last 2,000 years. They might already inventing something 2,000 years ago, which is totally awesome, and also very adaptive models, even better than the world bank one. So I think there should be a lot of research and understanding. Like there's actually a few projects that we even take like 6 months to understand how their cooperative in the village handle money, so that we can actually write those, how to say, like a tribal governance into the smart contract, instead of writing the banking governance into the smart contract. I mean, it's actually a project in Nepal, which is about like how people crowdfund from a village to build an irrigation system. It's just fantastic. Like for the 5 years time, their tribes just developed this awesome mechanism, which is very relevant to the impact bond. But I think the impact bond in US is like $3 trillion to build a hospital. But for them, it's like $10,000. And they can actually make all this kind of decision makers be part of this, and how the villagers can still try to have their own democracy on that. I think just amazing. So I think it's really about being humble and learn from the local culture, and actually using technology really just as a tool instead of superimposition, some sort of pre-assumptions on the local culture.
No, very cool. I mean, it seems like from what you're saying, change management's obviously vital, right? And understanding within that community the aspects of change management which are most important, right, for people to believe, because it seems like a big part of the problem is gaining trust. And it seems like from what you're saying, trust comes from participation, if I understand correctly too, right?
That's perfect. That's correct.
So could you explain a little bit about why you're convinced that the digitization and datafication can strongly participate in the broader solution of solving, say, poverty?
Well, I mean, I think on the one hand, it's really inevitable for everybody to participate in the data infrastructure for the next generations of any kind of, development issues. On the other hand, I think we definitely want more resolutions about like how we deploy capitals, so that we can actually, be more precise about how or what we're actually helping on the ground. So I think data actually has been using a lot in the capital market to make good decisions, to actually creating resolutions like Moody's and Bloomberg, all they creating this algorithm so that they can understand, predict about the future. I think it's the time right now we actually take all the tools back to the space of development, because I personally believe like all the tools already developed for the last 25 years. It's more about like how we can be very innovative to use those tools, but on the development issue, instead of just how to make more money for everybody. I'm not even saying that development is not making money, because development finance is a huge, huge, huge capital space that a lot of money is flowing in and out in that entire industry. So I think it's actually very inevitable. But at the other hand, I also really believe that, closing the next generation poverty gap through closing the data gap, I think it's basically what we really believe. Like if you ask me like how we can actually close the SDG, funding gap, how we can solve the entire world's poverty, I think the answer is like how we can close the gap of data divide. So, and that's basically my big high level answer to that question.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing. Just going to move the attention now to Mark, if you allow me, Mark. And again, I think within the area of societal transformation and the adoption of society, could you share with the audience what have been some of maybe the impediments or the challenges to driving adoption within this migrant worker supply chain?
Yeah, sure. I think there's two sort of different hypotheses that we approached 2 years ago. And one was the adoption rate within migrant workers. And I don't think that's a homogeneous group. And we'll go into that in a little bit in a second. but then also how was the adoption rate with inside corporates or governmental organizations that needed to be on the other side of that platform. I think time and time again, when we have deployed technology in field, we have been surprised on the upside of the take-up rate from migrant worker populations. I think we have had lots of learnings around how different demographics and in different countries prefer different platforms. So when we work in the Middle East, the migrant workers that we tend to work with tend to be slightly older, typically male, tend to like typing on computers, not like phones as much. We work in Southeast Asia, it tends to be much younger, highly mobile literate. We did a recent implementation in Malaysia looking at predominantly Indonesian migrant workers coming over and working within a large factory. I mean, normally we do this big training day where you have day one managers, day two you have migrant workers, and you have training as to how to use a platform and so forth. We're now having integrated through social media, folks are onboarding themselves prior to training. So I think our uptake on migrant worker side, and these are folks, of course, who are traveling overseas anyway, who are in contact with friends and family back home, who are sending money back home very frequently. So I think that has been surprisingly positive in terms of adoption. The larger challenge has typically been in changing processes amongst someone who has been an HR manager or operations manager for 20 or 30 years and does things in a particularly paper-based way, changing that process to try and demonstrate why it is better to move forward into digitalization, I think, to some of Tat's points, and how you can gain efficiencies through that. So I think it's trying to understand those different work groups. And it goes back to my earlier question of how does this make my life safer, or how does this make my life easier? One of our first projects, and one that we continue doing because it's particularly challenging, and we have a view that if we can make it work there, we can make it work anywhere, which is in aquaculture in Thailand. We have lots of Burmese migrant workers coming across the border and working in these large Thai aquaculture farms. And again, our adoptions amongst Burmese migrant workers tends to be very high. Facebook is synonymous with the internet. We're integrated into Facebook, and it's very easy to use. It was demonstrating to the farm managers as to why moving a process that was based on paper and has been for a long time into a digital environment helps with their auditing process, so that when their customers, Thai Union, come down on a quarterly basis and start doing audits, it's less of a teeth-pulling process and going through files and finding out data which might be right or might be wrong, and moving that into a more real-time basis. But I think it is those different, your earlier point on stakeholder influence, it's the different narratives for different groups as to why it's of benefit to them.
Yeah, very good. Thanks for sharing. I mean, I know you and Dr. Tat have plenty in common, but it seems like you're dealing with very similar situations through the work you're doing. So good opportunity to collaborate. Just for the sake of time, moving on to Boris. So Boris, earlier you explained the mission of BOW and why it's relevant in always changing environment. Can you share with us, how do you achieve that? And what are the core maybe principles that fuel this within your group?
Yes, Rodney. I mean, today we see new behaviors, new habits, new concerns from end users, and really it's impact us as a product manufacturer to leverage all the innovative technologies and to try to embrace that consumer lifestyle. So health is a priority. With the current new pandemic crisis, health safety is becoming really on top of everyone's mind. We can see as well that everybody has multi-devices connected, that everybody multiplied the number of devices from their professional work to their personal entertainments. And we see that there is a new way as well of commuting. So the mobility of people tend right now to travel less and refocus on their own living space. And in terms of investment and time. So all that push us to rethink all our products that we are developing with our designers, and to take all this technology to try to integrate them and still make them affordable. And that's, I'm going to take again the example of the UVC technology that we have implemented in a wireless charger. The UVC light technology is right now proven to be really highly effective against inactivating and destroying the DNA of the bacteria and the RNA of the virus. And we have developed a product which sanitize your smartphone in a very short cycle of 20 minutes. And it's true that this device, I mean, that we have launched at the beginning of second half of 2019, was a product that was sold at few thousand pieces, and now it's scaling to hundreds of thousands that are secured by all the channels for this end of 2020. And for that reason, we are expanding really the product compliance for trying to test really the product. And we are very proud that these last days as well, our team has been able to work with microbiology labs, showing that the Lexan Oblio, our product, is capable to kill the H1N1 virus, which is very similar to the COVID-19. And we are going, of course, to really inform the end users and to help them to understand that we have new solution in this new world. So the opportunity for us is really to bring the innovation for better life with all our new products, and we are looking to continue developing Bow Group and our brands.
Fantastic, thanks for sharing, Boris. So I guess what you're saying, just to read between the lines, is maybe your advice for other startups is to make sure you're really clear with regards to your principles, right? Because it seems like it's the principles that are driving the activity calendar and also the timeline too, right? So I think what you were saying inherently there is pretty important. Just looking at the time, because we don't have too much time ahead of us. I've only seen so far one question come through, which we can get to. Maybe just a final question for Mark, and I'm going to ask you this question because this topic of blockchain for me has done my head in over the last few years. There's been so much confusion about what it is and what it's not. So maybe from a technology perspective, can you walk us through how and why blockchain plays a role in your design choice?
Yeah, I can do that from a technology perspective and then just a real world example of where and how. So I think from a user's perspective, whatever platform or app you're using should look and feel exactly the same like a regular app to minimize effort on their behalf. I think as we've covered it a couple of times today, the real value add lies in the move away from a paper-based process. I mean, the fact that you would use an orchestrated workflow with a bunch of market participants that happens to use DLT, well, that gives you some better cryptography. It gives you some interesting workflow options, and it gives you some deterministic computation, but it's just a design choice. What we really look for as a first question is where is there an inefficient, typically paper-based process that has a high error rate and is potentially open to fraud? And how can we then create digitally native data or digitize existing data sets and then and only then decide how and where to store that data? So we're currently working with a UK publicly listed company with primary shareholders in Switzerland and in the UK. This company has sustainable forestry plantations across Africa. And currently when they're doing their ESG data reporting, they, like many, many other firms, just collect, they have a large Excel spreadsheet with, I don't know, 42 tabs. It goes around the company, it goes to external stakeholders, everybody fills in information. At the end of that process, it gets sent to an asset manager in Zurich or somebody in London who has no idea of data provenance of that information, how many times it's been shared. So it's about what we are doing and have deployed is connecting those primary shareholders as well as the board and the CEO into that process at a much earlier stage, so they can get visibility into the data all the way through from start to finish, and get to ask questions as that data is being entered. I think that if you look at that, there was that inefficient process of an Excel spreadsheet being passed around, moving that somewhere where you have much better transparency and immediacy on the data, but also you have much better data provenance and trust in what you're seeing.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing, Mark. We're getting the message that we've only got 4 minutes to go. So there's only one question. I'll wrap up that question as part of the conclusion. But I just think in the interest of time, if we can, guys, maybe start with Dr. Lam. 30 seconds of closing remarks from your side.
Well, I mean, I guess the whole idea about technology for good is, I think a lot of people may automatically think about it from a charity perspective, but I definitely think that it's a very perfect combination about generating impact and financial returns at the same time, because we're actually talking about a very blue oceans with the bottom billions, like we need to think about the positive impact on the one hand to gain their trust. And on the other hand, which is actually a totally new market that, a lot of big corporations cannot touch, or they don't know how to touch. And I think at the end of the day, the idea about the trust, like how your business model can generate trust with them, is essential. I think transparency, being ethical in terms of business model, in terms of your data governance, all those kind of things, part of the consideration.
Thanks for sharing, Dr. Lam. Much appreciated. Back to Mark. 30 seconds from yourself, Mark.
Yep, I think I'll repeat an earlier point that we are a deep tech company and we have a lot of technologists, but ultimately we look to take our lead from people in civil society and the public sector who understand specific issues, be that around ESG broadly or modern slavery and forced labor specifically. And I think for us, it goes back to the question of not technology and what it can do, but what are the questions you're looking to solve for first? So can this make my life easier, or can this make my life safer? And then understanding how technology can be applied to those specific questions. I think we found by solving for those two first and foremost, it allows us to align technology to them. I've seen a lot of technology projects where you build a really cool app and you try and push it out in field and it doesn't work for various reasons. So I think that public-private partnership model is critical to understand how technology can be used for good.
Thanks, Mark. And then finally from you, Boris.
Yes, Rodney. I think, I truly believe that it's our responsibility as entrepreneurs to really to guide and to give opportunities to consumers to make better choice for themselves. And I think here, the new solutions that we have, the new technologies that we have in front of us, is really showing that in this new world we still have opportunities, and we can embed these technologies to make our products better. To build our future. So this is my recommendation to all the startups.
Very good. And thanks to you, Boris. Look, the question that was asked was a question, I think, to PMI, if I understand correctly. The question was, how would someone like ourselves as a startup go about partnering with Philip Morris with regards to PM Equity Partners? My advice to all the startups on the call, whether it be with regards to the PMI Impact Initiative or the PM Equity Partners Initiative, to reach out to us. And we're really keen with everything that we do to have the conversation, very keen to have the conversation with anybody that might be interested in either of those initiatives. So please just reach out to us. And as I said, very comfortable to have the conversation. I just want to close on one thing. PMI made a pretty significant scientific submission to the US FDA some years ago, and as recently as yesterday, received an encouraging assessment by the FDA. So I'd encourage anybody who's interested in looking or better understanding novel tobacco products and the potential benefits that they offer to look at today's media and see what the US FDA has concluded with regards to our submissions. Look, 3:45, thanks again to Tat, thanks to Mark, thanks to Boris. I think it's been a great Tech4Good panel. To those of you who have connected, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and look forward to working with any of you where technology is part of the solution moving forward. So enjoy the rest of the summit. And again, thanks to everybody.